Welcome to the Building Web3 Podcast. Today we have Vinay from Mattereum. He's a true crypto OG who's helped launch Ethereum, and now he's working on solving the problem of bringing real-world assets on-chain. His company, Mattereum, helps provide an enforceable framework for real-world assets so no one runs off their future tokenized house. Remember, nothing stated here is financial advice. Welcome to the Building Web3 Podcast. Today we have my good friend Vinay. Vinay has a long history in Web3. Vinay, could you give us a brief background into what you were doing before you entered the Web3 space, and what was your come to crypto moment?
So, So my first year being paid 100% in anonymous digital cash was 1999. I was a cryptographic applications developer in the 1990s. Then after 9/11, took kind of a break from that until I was working for government, did 2 stints doing cryptographic applications designed for UK and US military, and then joined the Ethereum team in 2014.
Wow. So pretty much right from the get-go into Web3. So what led you to the space? So you're working in the applications, you got paid in 1999, you then started working for the government, and then what led you specifically to the Ethereum Foundation?
So I looked at Bitcoin and I said, anarchist software production practices and libertarian output currency. This is not going to work, right? It was very obvious that the split between an anarchist mode of software production and a libertarian product was just never going to settle down. They were going to have unsolvable political problems that were going to cripple their ability to innovate. So I said, that is great. It's a really nice piece of technology, but this is not my horse. And then I started hearing the word smart contract. And I'm like, smart contract? I haven't heard anybody use that phrase in 10 years. Let's go see what's going on over there. And that turned out to be my horse.
Absolutely. So you first hear this term. How do you get involved with the foundation? There's something you just apply to online?
I just start turning out to meetups, right? So I was familiar with smart contracts from like eWrites, which I think was launched in maybe 2008, 2006. Capability-based operating systems. There was a whole world of cryptography prior to Bitcoin. So the first team to go back and pull that heritage up were the Ethereum team. And I literally just started turning up to meetups and being like, "Hey, what's going on?" And they were just like, "Oh, okay, right. You know stuff. Yeah, I totally do." And I got a job.
Absolutely. So you get the job with Ethereum. What was your job at Ethereum, and what were you tasked with there?
So I started doing a bunch of the marketing and the comms work. The technical team is in London. The technical team is in Berlin. The comms team is in London. And I don't fancy a move to Berlin. And I'm also a bit like, God, I'm really tired of programming. I just come off a complicated cryptography project, and I'm just like, that part of my brain is kind of burned out, right? I want to go do something else. So I joined the marketing team, and then I kind of get dragged into project management. And so I go from kind of naming the releases and settling the community down and explaining to everybody that all software is late, particularly great software, to then writing the release post, which was the thing that sat on the front page of Hacker News for a day or so after the launch, programmable blockchains in context, and also just managing the last, 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 200 years of the release. Where, every day it was like, okay, so when are we ready to do this yet? Nope, there's a bunch of things on the list. Okay, well, let's go over the things on the list. And we just, gradually the number of issues came down and down and down and down and down until we ticked off a box and said, okay, 2 weeks. And off we went.
Wow. And so how long were you at the Ethereum Foundation?
So I joined probably Q3 2014. And then about a year later, they basically shrunk the foundation down to a skeleton crew because Ethereum was still trading well under $1. There just wasn't a lot of money in the ecosystem. So they stripped the foundation right down, and I went to Consensus, spent about a year at Consensus, and then took off on my own to do this.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We earlier today talked with Griff, and he has the Giveth, and he was talking about being at the DAO that had the major hack that led to Ethereum Classic. So was this predating that the Ethereum Classic split?
Oh, yeah. So, the Ethereum Classic split would have been 2016. So I was already working for Consensus at that point, if I remember correctly.
Wow. Okay, so then you go to Consensus. Eventually, you're going to start Mattereum. When did What did you do at Consensus, and then what ultimately led you to start Mattereum?
So right back from when I was at the foundation, I was trying really hard to get people to do something serious about the legal issues. It was really clear that we could do something really smart and really dramatic and get, some sort of, fundamental breakthrough in how the contracts and the blockchain and all that stuff work together. Right? There was a major thing to be done there. And I just couldn't really get the foundation oriented. The foundation was like, yeah. And I'm like, well, what about it? And that has kind of caused issues, right? There was a sense of, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this exactly. There was a sense of, why is this legal stuff our problem, right? Surely this is for the users to sort out. What do you mean legal infrastructure? Why is that an infrastructure problem? So that process of trying to figure out where the legal infrastructure for the Ethereum space belonged was an active conversation from 2014 onwards. Right? I mean, the currency that I'd been paid with in 99 was 100% gold backed. So we knew that it was possible to use tokens and smart contracts, legal contracts, to control tokenized value. I'd seen that done. I knew that you could do that. So the idea that you were going to build the technology to do that for the Ethereum space as a whole and plug it into the foundation seemed pretty rational. No. Consensus, a lot of what I was doing was getting things established in London. I wanted more resources, and I wanted to really try and build something that integrated tightly into the financial center here. Could not get support. Consensus very much viewed itself as being a New York shop. So at that point, I got a chiefy. And then it was time to start something, and that something was Mattereum, because I finally figured out that if nobody else was going to build this infrastructure layer for the Ethereum blockchain space, it was going to have to be me.
So let's talk a little bit about Mattereum and its mission. You talked a little bit about this. Essentially, for the layman's out there, it might be tokenizing real world assets. How would you describe the mission?
Okay, so the real crux of this is global enforceability of smart contracts as legal contracts. So you have two people, they make an agreement using a smart contract, something goes wrong in the agreement, you can't sort it out on chain for some reason, and at that point you decide that this is going to be a legal event, you're going to get lawyers, courts, and all that stuff involved. The classic example of that is real world assets. You buy a token for a house, you go to the house turns out to have been burned down 6 weeks ago in an unexpected electrical fire, and now you would like your money back, please, because they sold you the token after the house burned down. Clearly their responsibility. Could I please have my money back? Well, that's not an on-chain transaction, right? That's lawyers and judges and real-world processes. And if you don't have some generally accepted way of doing that both the legal and blockchain world acknowledge, how are you ever going to get this Ethereum thing actually to its capacity in the real world?
So let's talk about how that functionally works, because many people in the audience might be more of the developer minded, maybe more founders, and they're like, does this then default to international law? How does Mattereum kind of bridge the gap between what we know as the online space into even the regional issues? Because housing might be treated very differently in the United States versus somewhere like Denmark.
Yeah, absolutely. So the crux of this is about alignment of global systems. Ethereum is not the only global system out there that wants to be outside of immediate nation-state control. For example, Visa wants to work the same way globally regardless of where you are. The internet wants to work the same way globally regardless of where you are. Obviously Web3 works that way. Bitcoin works that way. International shipping, right? International shipping has as little contact with the nation state as it can possibly manage. So there are a set of well-accepted, well-refined global infrastructures which are used for all kinds of purposes by all kinds of people. And those global infrastructures have, in some cases, hundreds of years of legal precedent associated with them. So in our case, the global infrastructure that we plug into is the contract law machinery called the 1958 New York Convention on Arbitration. And you know the term Ricardian contract?
I've never heard it personally.
Okay, so Ian Grigg is the guy that figured out how to control physical assets using crypto tokens when he was selling gold-backed digital currency, tokenized gold, in, I want to say 99, maybe 2000. The project was called DigiGold, and it was essentially what you would think of as being something like a permissioned ledger. There was a Chaumian digital cash component, there was a ledger component, and that thing was the first real use of real-world assets. And it was completely mind-blowing, and I got on top of it immediately, and it's like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. So when we get around to Ethereum needs something like that, there's already a set of taillights to follow, which is Grig's work from 99. And at one point, I find Ian Grigg, and it's like, you're the Ian Grigg. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you're the Ricardian contract guy. And Ian is like, I haven't heard that name in a while. But, practically all of the technique that anybody is using to do legal stuff in crypto goes back to Ian Grigg. He is the great forefather of that entire field. So Ian figured out that you could use the 1958 New York Convention on Foreign Arbitral Awards as the backbone, because that got you 170 countries that were willing to work together. And if you wrote your paper contracts properly, that would also get you enforceability of smart contract. And that 1958 convention is the backbone of pretty much all international trade. It is absolutely the solid layer underneath basically all transactions between big companies. It's hugely important.
So we take this hugely important, we'll call it legal regime or legal contract interpretation.
Literally international convention, right? So all these countries are signatories to the convention. They've agreed they'll play by those rules.
Absolutely. So we have this legal underpinning. Then let's talk a little bit about the key features and functionalities of the Mattereum platform and how something goes about from being like, say, a gold bar or some kind of real estate into actually being tokenized on chain.
Mm-hmm. So that is a question that comes in layers. And the layers are basically three. So the question one is, what is the thing? Question two is, who owns the thing? Question three is, what happens if something goes wrong? So all of those questions are interwoven with contract law and the norms for enforcing contract law. So the critical insight, the thing that kind of binds the whole system together is this. It's almost impossible to create a real asset on chain. If you want a deed for a house and you want to put that deed on chain, if you want to make that deed from nothing, there's no way to do it, right? It's just almost impossible to make assets. If you want to make an asset which is a share of a corporation, the first thing you need is a corporate registration document from a government, and then the second thing that you need is the ability to sell a share to the public. So assets are typically created by the state. And this is a really important core concept. A lot of the problems that we have in crypto are that people are trying to create assets without any state license to do so. And if you do ask the state for a license to go and make a digital token, they give you 3 years of paperwork to do and tell you to come back with 200 grand of legal fees. Right? So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get the state out of the business of making these things work. Right? Okay, how on earth can you do that? Well, the answer is you can create liabilities without almost any state intervention. So if I write on a beer mat in a pub with a Sharpie, I owe you, 2 tires for a Honda Civic, and then I sign it and I date it and I hand it to you, that is a contract. And what we've created in that contract is we've created a debt instrument. Right? So if I write on a piece of paper, I owe you half a Bitcoin, and I hand that to you, you sign it, I sign it, maybe in some places we need witnesses. One way or the other, I can create a liability for something that the state doesn't even legally recognize as an asset. Do you see how that's kind of a weird thing?
Absolutely, but it makes complete sense as well.
It's a good start. So what we basically figured out is that you can represent a wide variety of debt instruments on chain as contracts with digital signatures. So if I put a PDF file that says I owe you 2 tires for Honda Civic, and I put that in IPFS, and then I bind that to a smart contract, and then we make that into a transferable token like an NFT, theoretically we could have a bearer instrument which is a debt for 2 Honda Civic tires. And that may or may not be legal everywhere, but if you go from 2 Honda Civic tires to 2 gold bars and you do a bit of serious legal legwork, now we're beginning to talk about, hey, we just tokenized gold. Because if I say I owe you 1 kilogram of gold or the equivalent cash value plus 5% for your trouble, and I give that to you as a debt instrument, well, as long as I have the money, it's cheaper for me to give you the gold. Now, if I don't have the money, now you have two problems. But as long as I do have the money, it's cheaper for me to buy the gold bar and give it to you, or give you the gold bar from my stocks, than it is for me to give you the cash. So I'm incentivized to deliver the gold because the gold is cheaper than the debt. And what you wind up with is a debt instrument, which can be, hey, we pay for this with the gold bar, or we pay for this in cash, but one way or the other, you, the token buyer, get your value. And this is the core paradigm. We represent the assets in the system as debt instruments embedded in a liability framework where the cheapest way to pay the debt is to give people what you said you were going to.
Got it. Now, the feature is essentially, let's say we want to tokenize one of these contracts. Let's say I'm going to be selling you my apartment, and I come to Mattereum. Do I go to the website? Essentially, how does this work? Like, I come in, I say, hey, I'm going to give Vinay my apartment in Medellin, Colombia for $100,000. And then this is tokenized, put on chain, and could be traded.
I wish it was so simple. So you and your lawyer are going to come in, and we're going to say to your lawyer, right, so in the jurisdiction this property is in, how do people do special purpose vehicles, right? How do you have some kind of corporate entity that sits on the land registry as the recognized owner of the asset? And given that you're probably in a civil law jurisdiction there, probably it's power of attorney in a law firm. If you were in a common law jurisdiction, probably it'd be a special purpose vehicle. So let's say, I guess, law firm, power of attorney. Great. So you got the law firm and the power of attorney, and the law firm will be the owner of the asset on the government land registry, and the law firm will then issue an IOU that says, we, the law firm, owe this house to anybody that will exchange this NFT with us. Okay. Now, do you see how that's kind of a weird sounding thing, but it sounds almost plausible?
Yeah.
Right. So to get that from almost plausible to actually legitimate requires a little bit of work. Right. There has to be a clear understanding of how the law works locally, and you need some entity, ideally more than one, in the system with more cash on hand than the value of the apartment. So if it's a $100,000 apartment, you need somebody in the room who's going to put more than 100 grand on the table in the event that the apartment turns out to be missing or defective or burns down or some other contingency happens. So in the case of the law firm has deep pockets and the law firm has legal insurance, maybe they're on the hook. Right? If you were a real estate developer, maybe you were going to do that off your balance sheet. You're selling 100 apartments, but your balance sheet is 1,000 apartments worth of property. But one way or the other, you need a deep pocket underwriter, because the whole point of these debt instruments is that if you miss the target, there has to be a backstop of cash. And that is the secret to the system, is you have to basically bind the token to the backstop of cash, but the cheapest way of discharging the obligation is to make sure the thing is delivered, and that protects the backstop of cash.
Got it. And then does Mattereum take care of that, we'll call it like a liquidity pool to back the underlying value of the real world asset?
So it's not a simple one pool thing. If you're going to take something like gold, for example, to make sure that you don't get robbed and the gold doesn't get stolen, you're probably looking at a commercial vault plus commercial vault's own insurance policies, right? But the non-delivery risk where somebody in the loop might refuse to honor the NFT contracts and then wouldn't hand the gold over, that might go out to a tokenized risk pool, somebody essentially doing blockchain underwriting. So what you wind up with is multiple different forms of risk management depending on what the asset is. Some of that could go out to blockchain risk, some of that goes to physical world insurers, some of it goes to balance sheet. And what we really do for a living is design the liability matrix inside which these NFTs are protected. It's kind of like having a risk register and then making sure that every single one of those risks is properly connected to some pool of money that will be available to cover the costs.
Absolutely. And I think
it's fiddly. I mean, this stuff is not, you don't just walk into this and do it. Doing it right is quite skilled.
Yeah, it's quite tricky. I think most people will be familiar with the financial instrument like an ETF, and they might be familiar with an ETF for gold. They would have, similar to what you say, insurance. There's going to be, the place to actually vaults to actually store the gold. How much different is like this tokenization process from, we'll call the ETF instruments? And do we see that Larry Fink has said that most things will become tokenized in the future? Do we see like ETFs as a stepping stone to what you'll do with Mattereum?
So an ETF allows you to control crypto assets using a government issued passport, right? A real world asset is exactly the opposite way around. It allows you to use a self-sovereign identity, and you can use that self-sovereign identity to control physical world assets. So the ETFs kind of go from physical identity to digital assets, and RWAs go from digital identity to physical assets. They're exact converses of each other.
Yeah, it's very interesting to think about. So let's talk a little bit about some of the Mattereum Asset Passport, because this is a phrase I encountered while I was going through your documentation. And could you elaborate on like what that means? And yeah, mostly just what that means, and we'll follow up from there.
Sure. So I mentioned having this thing that looks kind of like a risk register where you know all of the different things that could happen to your asset, and you've got somebody who's on the hook to basically cover the financial cost of each one of those things for the token holders. So that document is the Mattereum Asset Passport. It's a series of risks and a series of people who are carrying those risks, and it's sufficiently comprehensive that it should cover all possible contingencies. Now, in theory, right? Obviously, for any given risk register, there are risks which might escape. There are risks which might happen in unexpected ways. We at one point had a set of NFTs that came with alien abduction insurance attached to them, just to make the point that it was entirely possible to have risks that were outside of the conceivable risk envelope. I can't remember whether we ever issued those or not, but we certainly had the artwork from them. So what that gets you is it's a comprehensive approach for any legal asset to be put on chain. The New York Convention gets you 170 countries. Any asset that has a lawyer attached to it can be broken out as a series of risks: non-delivery, damage, fraud. All of these risks can be broken out. Every single one of those risks can be covered with some kind of backstop or insurance policy or some other mechanism. And once all of that's done and you tie a bow on top of it, that is the Mattereum Asset Passport. And once you have that in play, because it binds to the New York Convention, it gets you 170 countries worth of coverage. And because it's an instrument that can be configured to any legal property, you can do anything from patent licensing through to real estate fractionalization on the same fundamental mechanism.
Got it. So we've got the Mattereum Asset Passport. How would you say, what does Mattereum offer in its like core functionality? Is it the asset passport, it's the legal framework with which to settle disputes, where it's pretty much taking advantage of the legal framework that exists, adding, like, let's say, insurance onto it? Is it essentially creating one of these asset passports for each of the larger buckets, let's say like gold, oil, different kinds of assets itself?
So the way that we think about it is that we're basically a service bureau, right? You could say platform, you could say protocol, but at the end of the day, we're basically a service bureau. You walk in off the street and say, right, my company is going to be tokenizing coconut farming. And we say, great. What countries do you work in? Okay, we work in the following 12 countries. Great. You got legal counsel in each one of those countries? Yeah, we do. Fantastic. And then your lawyers, our internal consultants, me, a bunch of folks sit down, break out the stuff, figure out the risk registers, detail how all the insurances are going to work. If we find any gaps, we find somebody to carry those risks. And once all is said and done, once we're content and everybody's happy that the analytical framework is correct, tokens get issued. And the thing that makes us what we are is once that paperwork has been done once, you could reuse it across an entire industry, and this is where we get the economies of scale.
Absolutely. And then What kind of particular lessons have you learned from building this product? Because in my mind, I'm talking to software and hardware people all day. This seems more almost of the litigious variety, and it seems like a lot more like dealing with government agencies, insurance companies. It seems very more like traditional than most listeners would be accustomed to. So, what are some of the lessons you've learned from bridging that like cryptocurrency to traditional divide?
Yeah. So a way of thinking about it is this. Crypto assets are created on the blockchain using software. Physical assets are actually sort of created by governments using law. Now, created is a strong word for physical assets. If somebody makes something with a hammer and chisel, you're not going to say that the government made that. But what governments produce as a service is property rights. Government fundamentally is property rights as a service. You pay taxes so that the government will enforce property rights on your behalf. So in that property rights as a service paradigm, what we're doing is basically taking the system of property rights which exists on chain and a system of property rights which is created by the nation state and various international treaties, and we're creating a zone where there is agreement between those two systems about how reality works. It's like doing up a zipper, right? And in that overlapping regime, not every asset will ever be in that overlapping regime. There are assets which will trade fiat and they'll never get digitized. And there are weird things you can do with a smart contract that no court is ever going to bless. But in that overlap between the global system of international law and the global jurisdiction, or however you want to think of it as from the blockchain, what you get is a zone of harmonized expectations. And in the zone of harmonized expectations, you can bounce NFTs around for real estate and they will work like NFTs, but they will also work like real estate. And it's that harmonization of different systems that's really our core skill. All I really wanted to do when we started this thing was get 1 billion people using Ethereum every day. And to get 1 billion people using Ethereum every day, it had to be real world assets and it had to be legal property. And that was what Mattereum stepped in to do. The objective when I started this thing was to try and get a truly scaled market for Ethereum assets. And that meant solving real world problems using them. And this stuff, by the way, is not where you would expect it to be. So the British government just released just passed a new law called the UK Electronic Trade Documentation Act. And they themselves say that the digitization of global trade could produce $280 billion a year of efficiency savings. How much of that is going to be going over Ethereum? Well, that's kind of up to us.
Absolutely.
Is the Ethereum community going to solve world trade problems on chain? If so, we get a chunk of that $280 billion. Doesn't that sound good?
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about some of the adoption. So how early stage is Mattereum? What kind of adoption are you guys seeing?
So Mattereum is still very much, it's kind of at the last stage of the R&D phase. We did our first transaction live for a customer 3 years ago. The most expensive thing transacted on the platform so far is $102,000. We did a land listing for $2 million that has not sold yet. We also figured out how to do securitization so that assets could be taken and fractionalized. So what we've basically been doing is going around kind of ticking off technical capabilities. Can you do gold? Yes, we can do gold. Let's do a test run of gold. Okay, we sold 7 bars. What about fine art? Okay, that's fine art. How do we vault fine art? How do we authenticate fine art? Okay, great. Let's go do the fine art thing. Yesterday, I talked at a thing called the Luxury Law Summit, and it was our partner from the Stradivarius world and a friend of his who brought a Stradivarius violin and played it at the Luxury Law Summit for a room full of lawyers for companies like LVMH. And that sort of reach, that partnership hasn't issued a single token yet, but you bet stuff is coming. Mm-hmm. So we're at that point where we've proven the system works. We've got our pilot customers. We're issuing the token, and the business development push that comes at the end of the token sale is where we're going to get world-class gold directly from a big refinery. We're going to get some real estate fractionalization going. You're going to see all this stuff become real. I should say, now that I've mentioned the token, we now have to do the legal disclaimer power hour, where I say the token is not available in the US and the UK. It is issued by Mattereum's German subsidiary, Mattereum GmbH, and there is also a very strong set of terms and conditions which apply to purchasing those tokens. That concludes the legal disclaimer power hour.
And this is, of course, not financial advice or solicitation to buy any kind of security.
Precisely.
Precisely. I open up every episode. That's my intro usually. It's like, and nothing said is financial advice, of course. So let's talk about some of the challenges you faced as a founder. Mostly when I talk to founders, they reference marketing or fundraising. Do you find it's maybe these like more litigious issues where like each asset is so different and you essentially have to coordinate the insurance policies, all of these kinds of things? Or where do you find the biggest challenges as a founder?
So the problem is we're still too freaking early, right? We're just still too freaking early. So if you think of like real estate transactions, about $3 trillion worth of real estate is exchanged every year. Of that $3 trillion, probably 10 or 20 million is exchanged on the blockchain. You know, that's like, what is that, 7 decimal places down, something like that. So we're in a position where, you know, you say real estate on the blockchain, you say gold on the blockchain, you say fine art on the blockchain. Even if you've worked out exactly how to do it, even if you've done pilot projects, even if everybody understands the legals work, you're still in a position where it's so early in the evolution of the space that doing a transaction this way is still newsworthy and weird and notable. And none of this stuff really works until you're doing kind of $1 billion a year of asset issuance. And I want to say on that, you know, a lot of people are talking about RWAs, and when they say RWAs, what they really mean is stocks or bonds or, you know, other pre-existing financial instruments which are already digitized. So taking a thing which is digitized like a PLC share and putting that on chain as a token is useful, but not necessarily novel. You know, tokenized IBM stock works pretty much like regular IBM stock, and it's clever that one can do it, but also at the end of that process, you've got an IBM share that you've tokenized. What we're interested in is tokenizing the things which have no digital representations and no digital exchanges. And it's a very different mindset.
Absolutely. And bringing huge asset classes online, which if you come down to Medellin, Colombia, they don't even have a concept of like the MLS. And for people listening, the MLS is kind of a large listing platform in the US for all kinds of real estate. So bringing these things online would be quite revolutionary, to say the least.
Absolutely. And, you know, because it works in a contract law framework, like, you know, there will be a Colombian method for putting a corporate owner on a property register and then having the ownership of the land change because of something that corporate owner does rather than having to take it down to the land registry every time. It's probably power of attorney. It might be special purpose vehicles. It might be some other provision in law, but there will be a way of doing it. And what that means is you could build a blockchain land registry without requiring the government to do any work. You take the land, the property, you put it into special purpose vehicles, or you put it into a law firm's power of attorney containers, and then you bind those to tokens, and then the tokens are exchanged, and what you have is essentially an L2 land registry. And it's fine. Governments, generally speaking, will not object to that as a way of doing things because it makes their life easier. You know, there's no abrogation of authority. There's no taking away from the government's right to maintain the ultimate land register. It's just you use the provisions of law that they give you in a way that solves a problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's hope. You know, you never know what they ultimately find issue with at the end of the day, but let's hope.
As long as you take the lawyers with you, generally speaking, government is fine.
That's very, very true. So can you talk about, because it's still early days, can you talk about any kind of either notable partnerships or collaborations that you guys have formed and kind of how that's impacted the project?
So there are 2 clusters that we are wildly excited about, and neither of them, weirdly enough, is real estate. We're convinced that real estate is the future for us and for the blockchain, and I'm sure we're going to get to big real estate stuff down the line, but right now the stuff which is red hot is, weirdly enough, space industry. We've seen, oh yeah, yes, that's exactly what I guessed. So we're partners with a project called Moonhat, and what Moonhat is looking for is a tokenized IP licensing scheme, so they can take their enormous partner network and handle all the cross licensing of intellectual property, so that they can get the patent licenses cleared up on chain.
That's a very interesting. Would not have guessed at all.
us either, right? I mean, I wound up talking to the Moonhut folks, and the Moonhut folks are like, "What do you do?" And we went blah 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 intellectual property, blah blah blah. And then wait, intellectual property, and so it turns out that their enterprise is, there is so much complexity in getting a whole bunch of big entities in the space industry to work together that is to do with patents and patent licensing. What they're looking for is a blockchain-based solution for slashing the cost of doing all of the legal work necessary to get all these patents cross-licensed so that you can build stuff. And it's amazing, right? It's like, we could work on a moon base. We could work on a moon base. What do you do working on the moon base? You get to go up in the rocket ship? No, we're down here with the lawyers. Oh, it's the best part. So it's kind of like, you can't imagine a less glamorous aspect of the space industry than tearing through the intellectual property stuff with the lawyers, but somebody's got to do it, and why not us?
Yeah, very, very interesting application. I would not have guessed, but I'm interested to see how all that develops. And would you say that's like one of your most exciting use cases is a space station tokenization for intellectual property?
So that's a cool thing, right? The other space industry client that we've got is looking at legal frameworks around telemetry and avionics data from things like satellite systems. So if you report to me that there is a piece of space junk heading for me, and then I move out of the way based on that, and you actually gave me accidentally mistaken information, and I just moved my satellite for no reason, am I going to be able to send you a bill or not? Right? Very sorry. Yeah, we had a sensor glitch. We told you to move your satellite for nothing. Well, that's $40,000 worth of fuel, and it's taken 3 weeks off the life of our satellite. Could we send you a bill? So being able to figure out how you handle, again, the licensing of data exchange in space, very similar problem, very exciting. And we've just signed a partnership with a company that does that stuff as well. Those guys are called, I'm about to space their name, Xender. So, having seen two of those come along quickly, we are pretty sure there are more. The other hugely exciting collaboration is with SEMSA JP, which is the oldest gold refinery in Spain. So SEMSA are 100 years old, and they're one of the 66 refineries in the world that can produce gold bars of the standard used by government and central banks to store gold. 400-ounce gold bricks in a system called the Good Delivery System. So the ability to get good delivery bars tied directly to NFTs creates the shortest possible trajectory between gold and Bitcoin. And that creates what we call the two-asset portfolio, Bitcoin, gold. Could be Ether gold, could be a basket of cryptocurrencies and gold, whatever the heck you want to do, by all means do it. But a portfolio which uses gold as the hard asset rather than US dollars. Because let us not forget that when Satoshi created Bitcoin, it was a protest about the dollar being constantly inflated out of existence by the US government. The best trick the devil ever pulled was convincing people that he didn't exist. Similarly, calling a dollar-denominated asset a stablecoin is practically satanic relative to Satoshi's original vision. What do you mean stablecoin? You mean inflation ticket? No, we mean stablecoin. I've checked. That is in fact a dollar inflation ticket. Right? So, we have to get away from dollar-denominated stablecoins. It's ridiculous.
Honestly, great branding, by the way, on calling it stablecoins instead of like pegged coin or something like that.
Right? And, it's people have been really seriously hoodwinked by the stablecoin as an idea because the dollar is not stable. So pegging yourself to the dollar is not the creation of a stable instrument.
Yeah, very, very funny. So if you weren't working in the real world asset space, there are many problems in Web3 that need good developers, good founders to solve. So if you couldn't work on this project, where are some places that you feel there's just not enough attention or people are overlooking this?
Probably I'd be working on humanitarian aspects in Gaza, to be honest. I worked on humanitarian stuff as a theoretician and a designer for years and years and years and years and years. If you ever need like 100 million people rehoused in a hell of a hurry with no budget, I'm your guy. Wow. Have you been to Burning Man?
Was it Griff? I think Griff mentioned you guys were at Burning Man together.
Yes. So
Okay.
I designed a refugee shelter in 2002 that's been mass deployed at Burning Man for really, at this point, 15 years. Right.
Wow.
And I just came back from an event 2 months ago in DC, which was basically me talking about the use of these shelters to various aspects of the US government, including the military.
Wow. And then, sorry, to touch on this point more, is it, how did you get into that?
Somebody asked me whether I could design a refugee shelter that could be folded flat and put back on a truck so that you could basically have an emergency, put the shelters up, everybody's in the shelters. When it's safe to go home and the floodwaters have gone down and everything is chill, you pack the shelters back on the truck, you take them back to where they belong, and then you put the shelters up in their backyards while they clean their houses out. So somebody said, hey, could you do that? And I said, I could take a crack at it, and 15 minutes later I had a design.
Oh, wow. Right. Well, guys, if you weren't already convinced, obviously Vinay is an incredible polymath here. So if people want to learn more about Mattereum, want to learn more about you, where can they go to connect with you online?
So Mattereum.de has all the kind of token issuance, token related stuff, both our token and also other people's tokens. The Asset Passport is a technology, lives at Mattereum.com. Hexayurt.com has a bunch of materials about the Hexayurt, but the better stuff is on Apropedia. So Apropedia is like a Wikipedia, but it's for appropriate technology information. There's a great amount of stuff there. A colleague of mine, Brian Howard, has been overhauling all of that stuff, and it's so much better than it was. Very happy with that. I wrote a book called The Future of Stuff, which is about circular economies and how we could potentially start straightening out the global industrial manufacturing base using blockchain technology. That is available on Amazon. And if you just Google, or if you basically take a topic and my name and stick it into Google, if I've done something, it'll be there.
Incredible. Well, I'll put all the links in the bio to the things that Vinay mentioned. Vinay, thank you so much for coming on to the Building Web3 podcast, and thank you to all the listeners. I hope everyone goes on and builds some very cool projects with Vinay's advice.
Thank you. And remember, we're here to help other projects. So if you've got an RWA project and you're just like, oh my God, the lawyers, how are we ever going to do this? How's it going to work? The answer is you call me, and the Mattereum team will sit down and talk to you, and we'll figure out how to do it with you. And, your tokens will get issued and it will be great. Your lawyers will be happy. We'll be happy. We're not very expensive in the grand scheme of things. The intention was to kind of do what ENS did for keys, but for physical assets. Have a universal namespace, a universal register, so you could get all these physical assets pulled on chain, and then people could build DeFi machinery around all these physical assets that have been pulled over a standard pipe. So, we are very willing to help. It's like it's there as a service to get everybody's physical stuff into a position where it's on Ethereum. You can do things with it. Isn't that what we always wanted?
Absolutely. Well, connect with Mattereum, connect with Vinay online. Me and him are often on Twitter Spaces together. So come join, learn more about the ecosystem. And this is another episode of the Building Web3 podcast. Thank you all for listening.